Hello, ladies. It's and anyone else who's there that I can't see. It's Richard here, Richard McRoberts. I was the person who was behind Ziptales, and so I'm going to be giving you let's call it a tour of Ziptales, with particular reference, of course, to the potential uses by librarians and libraries and parents too, of course, of the resource. Just a very brief background for me before I get down to the details. I was a teacher for 23 years in various schools in Australia and briefly in London. Then did an MEd and specialised in literature, imagination and narrative specifically. And then I created a couple of businesses, a publishing business and then this online business, Ziptales. And then I spent another 26 years running those businesses. So Ziptales was an idea that was started in 2002, and by a decade later, it was really quite a big site. And I'm going to be talking then today about the sorts of things that a librarian can do. We are looking at, of course, pardon me, the student dashboard, the student view, the child's view. Clearly, because a lot of our customers were schools, we use the nomenclature of teachers, so student as opposed to child, certainly not kid. Anyway, student dashboard, in other words, the child's view. There are three views, which possibly you know, but let me, if you don't mind, just quickly go over that. There's the student view, there's the librarian view, there's the parent view. And for the sake of this particular session, the teacher view has been cut out because that goes into territory that's not really appropriate and wouldn't be particularly of interest to you. So the default is student, which is what we're looking at. If we look at the student dashboard, we immediately see that then is broken down into three categories: preschool, developing, F to 2, foundation to 2, kindergarten to 2, and 3 to 6. So we're talking grades, we're talking effectively the year levels in most schools. Pardon me. Let's have a quick look at some of these and see what we see. And I'll take a brief moment for each of them in passing, but I'll make it as speedy as I can, because really there's so much material I can't really talk about everything in any sort of detail. So I'll be a bit selective. For the little kids, we have things like My First Words, which is things like this. So they're just learning. They're just learning words.
Dog. D-O-G.
So that's for the littlies. That's for the really little kids. Letter fun is pretty much at the same level, where if we take a particular category.
A is for apple. Apple.
And likewise, there are other things in that category too. There are nursery rhymes, which are really a lot of fun. And while some people might say, why would you have nursery rhymes? I think it's fairly obvious when you consider that the sound of language is intimately related to how to learn language. So phonics is involved there, but I certainly won't talk about phonics. So if we look at a particular one, we're looking here, again, this is for the little kids. We're talking kids from 3, 4 to 5, I suppose, roughly, very roughly. These are materials which bring the rhymes to life. As you can see, that's a little animation with a recording of the two singers who sang the song, the rhymes, I should say. ABC, I won't get into, it's a little bit complicated, but that's essentially teaching the letters, not just teaching them, but showing how to form them. So that might be of interest, but I thought I'd just quickly talk about that. Story time consists of 8 stories, retellings of famous fairy tales, Billy Goat Gruff, Three Little Pigs, etc., using puppets, tiny little puppets. The real puppets which we filmed were about this high. So effectively what you're looking at there, I'll just look at
Goat Scruff.
In the reduced screen. You can expand this, of course, to take the
Once upon a time, there were 3 billy goats. A small billy goat. My name is Billy. I'm only little. A middle-sized billy goat. My name is Millie. And a big billy goat. I'm Big Bill. I'm big and tough.
And the other things that are in, pardon me, in story time are a set of cartoons. They are full on, literally full on cartoons. So Wendy and the Genie, for example, again, I won't expand it, but you can expand it to the whole screen, of course, is a
Wendy
cartoon
and the
about a
Genie.
character called Wendy,
Wendy was in the attic.
and
She
she
was looking for a lost
discovers a
toy.
genie in a bottle.
What she found instead was a lamp. A
Okay.
very old lamp.
I won't go any further. You get the idea. So effectively, those stories are absolutely applicable to children from effectively the time they can understand English, so 2, 3, right up through to the middle school, effectively, middle primary school, of course. The Adventures of Wendy are meant to be fun, and they're original stories, of course, meant to be fun and easy to understand, and the animations, which are really very cute, make it a very attractive session. If you wanted to take one or more of those stories for your story time or shared reading sessions. I took a little bit longer on that because I think that's quite an interesting one. Puppet Plays is a series of puppets, again with live puppets, but I'll just sort of pass over that. Easy Readers I'll come back to, and Ready Set Learn is a little bit of curriculum, so I'll pass over that. All right, so that was preschool. So that's all material for kids from 2, effectively 2, 3, up to 5, 6, etc. Then we move to F to 2, Foundation Kindergarten to 2. Some of these, of course, are the same. So you'll see ABC, Story Time, Puppet Plays, Easy Readers, but then a lot of new material. So we have Timeless Tales. In Timeless Tales, we have retellings of famous stories. Most of them are about 20 pages long. They're graphic novels, basically. Most of them are graphic novels, except for Peter Pan and Pinocchio, which are 30 pages long. So they're really quite long. I think it might take a lot, because the computer's doing a lot of things at the moment. I won't try and load that. That's going to take a little while to load. But effectively, a lovely retelling in graphic novel form of the famous Collodi story, Pinocchio. Lovely material, all, of course, with text and with voiceovers. We always have voiceovers. What else have we got here? We've got Timeless Tales, Easy Readers. Junior Readers is interesting because Junior Readers has a series of categories: Imaginary Worlds, which is essentially fantasy stories; People Like Me, which is really relationship and emotion stories; We're All One, which is an inclusivity section, and that's brand new. That only was uploaded last year, about the Indigenous people and the idea of inclusivity. Stories from Long Ago, which is a retelling of Maori and Indigenous stories, and non-fiction fun facts. So that's that. Joke in a Box is a series of jokes. It may be of interest to you. You click and it tells a joke. Which may be of interest. It's if the children in the library or at home are just roaming through Ziptales at their leisure, they might find that very interesting. It may not appeal to you in the library, but it might appeal to them, if you know what I'm saying. Puzzle Palace is a series of interactive puzzles. So, for example, for word play, let's look at creatures, for example. Here we go. So, for example, can you put the word together? It's fully interactive, and it has a little animation at the end if they get it right. That's Puzzle Palace. There are quite a few there, and that might be of interest again. Probably more for children who are doing it on their own. Probably not. It could be used in a group, but maybe not. Rhyme Time is poetry. Make and Do is interesting. That may be of interest. So, for example, we have all sorts of make and do: how to make finger puppets, how to make a little parachute, how to make Christmas angels or a Jack in a Box, and that's cute and interesting. Happy Schools is about bullying, so I'll skip over that. So we've talked about preschool, we've talked about F to 2, and then the other part, the last part of the library, because I think of Ziptales as a library. is the 3 to 6. So grades 3 to 6, years 3 to 6. Where if you look at this, you'll see there's a grid. Now, the top part of the grid, which I think you can just see my mouse moving over, the top 16, isn't it? 16 categories are all stories. So let's take an example. If we look at adventure, we have a series of stories which are all adventure stories, quite clearly. Let's just take one as an example. I'll talk about some of the things that you'll see inside this in a moment, but let's just take an example. Dr. Wow in Atlantis is a science fiction fantasy story. The idea being that the characters go on an exploratory adventure trying to find the lost city of Atlantis. Now, I'll just show you what it looks like, because the template or the style that we have is essentially the same throughout the whole of that library, the digital e-book library, where you have text. There is no voice. There is a voiceover, but it's not coming through at the moment. There is a voiceover, professional voiceover by trained actors. You have the text itself, which is, of course, read to the children, the thing that you can't hear, but it's read to them, so they don't have to actually be able to read as long as they can click between the different pages. There are little animations, as you can see there. And at the end of every story, are two interactive comprehension tests. There's a fill the gaps, where, for example, they have to read the text. They do have to be able to at least read this amount of material, which is probably about 100 words, I guess. Pardon me. And they make choices. An adventure in what? It was in a submarine. They were looking for the legendary civilization of Atlantis. And while I won't get a very good score because I haven't done it properly, this is how it works. The other one in that is a fill the gaps, but look, I don't think we need to look at the fill the gaps. So every story has the two interactives, the fill the gaps, the one that you just saw, and multiple choice. The other thing that I'll talk about in a moment are the worksheets. So let's have a quick look. So we have the genre categories are, pardon me, adventure, animal, children in history, choose your own adventure, comedy, fairy tales, fantasy, graphic classics, which is not the ones you were looking at before, but there are 4 new ones: The Happy Prince, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, King Arthur, and some very interesting documentaries on graphic novels. That's worth having a look at too. Interactive readers, which is more for children who are struggling with reading, and it's a way of trying to build up their skills. Have a look at that if you're interested in that particular idea. It may not be for everyone, and it's not really what you'd call mainstream. It's something that some librarians or teachers or parents would be interested in, maybe not a lot of others. Each of these categories, mystery, myths, people stories, scary, true tales, yucky, and so on, have exactly the same formula as you just saw with adventure. An identical template, but the content is rich and varied and original. The stories themselves were written by Australian authors. I think we finally had something like 41 different authors creating stories for all those different categories. The last thing to look at is Advanced Library, because the Advanced Library was put in when certain people, customers, as it were, said, why don't you have things for good readers? The sort of kids who can read Harry Potter or things that are really quite complex in terms of their reading abilities. Here, therefore, you have another set of stories, but at an advanced level, so that they're not like the ones you were just looking at. They're much more complicated. If we take, for example, mystery as an example, 4 mystery stories, and you'll note immediately from a librarian's point of view that the greater difficulty in the neutral, impartial sense of the text. So if we have a look at this is a retelling of the famous Sherlock Holmes story, The Dancing Men. And you can see immediately it's much more text rich. It still has art, but there's a lot of text. This is for kids who are advanced readers. At the end, if I'll jump straight to the end, exactly the same though. The fill the gaps, the multiple choice. So the kids can get a sense of whether they've understood the story if they get a reasonable score in fill the gaps or multiple choice. They don't have to do it, but it might be of interest to them. A lot of kids who are good readers particularly might think, how did I do? Right, the other things in the 3 to 6 set are Rhyme Time, which you've already seen, Make and Do, which you've already seen, Puzzle Palace. Skill Builders are probably more for teachers because it's teaching how to do things like grammar, punctuation, comprehension, and spelling. It may be of use, but look, I'm just quickly passing over it. There's a thing called Story Machine in which the children can choose characters and then a plot and then put a story together. Possibly, again, more for teachers, but it might be worth looking at. Lessons on writing, lessons on NAPLAN, and curriculum lessons. So that's a sort of quick overview, if you like, pardon me, of the different things, that Ziptales offers. If we go to the librarian view, now effectively what we've been looking at for the last 10 minutes or whatever it is the kid's view, what the child sees if the child's going through Ziptales, either unaccompanied or at their leisure. When the librarian or the parent is involved, the content's the same, but the view has slight changes to it. Let's have a look at that. So if we go back to the last category I was looking at, extending literacy, you notice it's the same 3 categories. The icons have changed slightly and it's color coded. This is the librarian's view. Let's go into that. This time we're looking at 3 to 6. This time you have the same icons, the same stories effectively, but under each you'll notice there are 2 little icons. There's one called Program Details, which gives you a very quick summary of each story. The one we were looking at before was Dr. Wow in Atlantis. There's a very quick summary of what the story is, the number of words, the themes, the reading level, and things of that kind. And the other thing, sorry, I jumped out of that accidentally. The other thing for each category of story are the worksheets. And I said before I'd mentioned the worksheets. Worksheets have been set up largely, I suppose you'd say, for school use. However, it's up to the librarian to choose what she or he does with the story. Once the child's read the story, what do you do next? Now, it might be of interest to look at this. So let's have a look at Dr. Wow in Atlantis, and I'll make this a slightly, yes, there it is. I'll just make it a little bit smaller. You can see what it is. So it's fairly simple sort of material. If the child's read that particular story, and this is the other one, it may be of interest to librarians to be able to do to give them worksheets, but it's entirely up to the librarian. Also in the librarian dashboard, which is the one we're looking at, librarian up the top, we have all sorts of other goodies. And the goodies, I think, are the things that I would now like to talk about for another couple of minutes. Then I'll talk briefly about parents, and we'll talk about other issues. There are user guides. So quick start user guide, how to use it in a library effectively. I won't open that, but have a look at it. Reading levels. Now here, I think I'll slow down and take a little bit more care about how I discuss the readability issues of Ziptales. Originally, Ziptales was created quite a few years ago now, and the concentration of the library was largely in the primary middle school. So effectively 3, 4, 5, 6. Not a huge amount at that stage for the little kids, and not enough for the older kids. We gradually expanded the library, which over time became bigger and bigger. So from the original 44 stories that we had, we finally ended up with something like 200 plus stories. I think that's about the right number. 200 plus stories, might be 250 stories. And then all the other things, all the lessons, all the other things in Ziptales. Coming back to the stories though, and this is the key thing, clearly any teacher or librarian is concerned with the idea of readability. And we finally, probably about 8 to 10 years ago, I'm sorry, not clear about the date, but it's a while ago. We then converted to our new scheme to put together all the different stories and texts on Ziptales and make sure that there was a grid that they could be understood within. And we came up with the idea of a 10-stage readability scheme. And we called it, fairly obviously, you can see there, Zip Stage 1 through to Zip Stage 10. We then correlated that using our primary consultant who did the tabulation and the testing effectively with the reading recovery levels, which you can see there. And we paid the Americans to get the Lexile levels, which you can see there. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. And because the other famous readability test is Flesch, Dr. Flesch's test, we put that in as well. Some people, people have different views about readability. It's a fairly contentious issue, I suppose. But my feeling is that Flesch, while it's an off-the-shelf test, is in fact pretty good. When I last did research on this, the reliability of the Flesch test was 93%. That's pretty good. Reading recovery these days is a bit controversial, but I won't get into that discussion. But we left it there because a lot of teachers and a lot of librarians are interested. And Lexiles, I believe, is pretty reliable, and certainly is backed by very serious research. Okay, the reading levels, 10 levels. And then what we did was to come up with a way of testing the child, if you decide to do it. You don't have to, of course. Testing the child in order to find out where they fit. So let's suppose we're talking about a child who's 7 years old, and we're not sure whether the child is going to cope with certain sorts of stories of the 250 odd stories on Ziptales. So if you wanted to do it, you could say, okay, this child's probably in year 2. Let's suppose that the child is fairly average in his or her reading ability. Let's start by getting the child to do one of the tests which roughly relates to that level. So they click on the thing. I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. It looks like that. They continue. They choose bad dog, which is the level that we think he or she is at. And then the child does a test, a multiple choice test, which probably takes 5 minutes. At the end of that, it says, yes, great effort. Your reading level is Zip Stage 6. And then it gives you all sorts of different stories to read. So that's quite important. I think you need, as librarians, to understand that particular concept. I'll show you, perhaps it's best to go back and look at the kids' view. Reading test, there it is. You open it up, you go in, and you click on bad dog, and off you go. And it then takes the child through the story. And sorry, I'm rolling down the wrong way. Go to the story, you click on this, and then it takes you through, and the child does the test. And hey presto, 5 minutes later, they have a sense, you have a sense, they have a sense of where they fit. No judgments are made at all about levels. It's unmarked, as it were. So you simply are told, as in that example, Zip Stage 6. The teachers and librarians know what those stages are, but the kids don't. And then you have the Ziptales, the Zip story list. So let's take 6, which is the one I was just using it as an example. Click on that. These are all the stories. So if the child we've just been talking about is really at Zip Stage 6, then theoretically all these stories are appropriate to their reading ability. And if we therefore take one, it takes us straight to that story. If the child goes and has a look through and says, Fancy Josephine sounds good, or The Bravest Knight, or Welcome to Fairyland, or A Happy Prince, that sounds good. Click on that, it takes you straight to The Happy Prince, which we think is rather useful. So going back, however, to the librarian view, because I've now sort of made a couple of points. There are some videos on how to use Ziptales. There are some lesson ideas for librarians specifically, because this is the librarian dashboard on what to do and which stories might be of interest. Have a look at that. Promotional resources, if you're trying to promote Ziptales to your customers, here are some things that you can use. And finally, Ziptales, the full guide. We originally had a book version of the guide, which was everything on Ziptales inside a book, a hard, a printed book. However, it was extremely expensive to send it out to libraries and schools, and it finally proved to be a bit complicated. So we did it as a digital version. So here's the librarian dashboard. Here are all the things that you need, the test, stories list, and all these other resources. The final thing I'd like to talk about is what's available to parents. I'm sorry, I just too quickly. So I moved from librarian to parent. Color-coded again, magenta, and exactly the same material, exactly the sorts of things that you'd expect. This time, however, there's a little video on what Ziptales is, just a little video to explain Ziptales to parents, not to librarians, and certainly not to teachers, but to parents. How to use, a series of little videos, how it all works, quick little video. I think they're about 2 to 3 minutes long. Reading levels, because even parents probably should know a little bit about the levels. They may not understand the technicalities as you people would, but they probably should be aware of it, I suppose. And Ziptales, the full guide. With Ziptales and home use, as I understand it, I don't run Ziptales anymore, but I understand that once the library takes the subscription to Ziptales, all your customers without limit can use it at home.